guys, it's Nicole. Welcome back to another video and welcome to a book haul video, which I think it's been almost a year since I've done a book haul. The last one I did, I believe, was my Christmas book haul at the end of last year, so it's been a while. So yeah, I'm excited to show you what I've got. I'm going to split them up into categories. So the first category are books I have not read. Then I'm going to show you books I've read and books that were gifted to me. So let's go. So the first one I want to show is The Wolf of Yarrow. I want to read this one so bad. I bought it in June. I think I was having like a sad day, so I just like rewarded myself with this. All I know about this series is we follow a woman, I think she's in her 30s and she's a mother and she's a warrior, and that's exactly why I wanted to read this book. I really love fantasy books that follow female characters, but particularly older female characters, which I love that it's sort of becoming a trend now. I believe the main character in here is also a ruler, so we love seeing not only a strong woman but a woman in power. Like, I'm just so excited. I've heard incredible things from a lot of my friends, and yeah, this is definitely a book I need to read before the year ends. Another book I really want to read before the year ends, but we'll see if it happens, and that is the entire The Inheritance trilogy bind up by N.K. Jemisin. This is big. And it is 3 books in one. I don't know a whole lot about this, but I have read a little bit of N.K. Jemisin. I've only read the first 2 books in her Broken Earth series, and I really loved them so much that I knew I want to read all her stuff. I know this one has to do with gods, and I believe that like each book we follow different characters. So I'm very intrigued. I've heard, again, just incredible things. I really love N.K. Jemisin's world building and sort of the themes and concepts she explores. So I had to buy the bind up of this, you know. It is so heavy, I need to put that down. Anyway, moving on. I also picked up The Gilded Wolves. Sorry, wrong book. I picked up The Gilded Wands. I wanted to say wolves again. The Gilded Ones. Too many books have like 2 similar titles these days. I can't, my brain can't keep up. This book is book 1 in a new YA fantasy series. We follow this young girl who lives in this village, and in this village, when they become of a certain age, they have to do this blood rites ceremony, basically to test whether their blood is worthy, and her blood sort of tests is, I don't know if it's unworthy or like different, but her blood isn't what it is supposed to be in order to stay in the village. So instead she ends up finding out that because her blood is different, she is someone special with special abilities. It just sounds like a classic YA fantasy setup that's going to be a really fun time, and I love those novels. I'm always going to love those novels. I also picked up Poison Study. Now, this book I have literally been meaning to read for a million years. Like, I can't even tell you how long I've wanted to read this book, like since I was quite young, and it's just a book I have never gotten to, and I bought this like at the very beginning of the year and I still have not gotten to it. I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I should have put this on my list of books I want to read before the end of the year, because it's just shameful I haven't read this one at this point. I know that this follows a girl who I think is an assassin, and she's supposed to be executed at the beginning of this book. But instead of being executed, she is offered the position of the taste tester for, I believe it's the royal family or someone of importance in this world. So she'll basically taste test their food, and there's a possibility that she could die from poison in the food. That's all I know. That premise alone has sold me on this for so long. Next, I also picked up, again, at the very beginning of the year, Winter's Orbit. I picked this up very shortly after its release, and I did so because a lot of my friends read it and really enjoyed it. At the very beginning of this book, the ruler has died, and the person who is next up in line has to have an arranged marriage with someone else. And it's a male-male enemies to lovers romance. And I think it's also supposed to be really quite political and just also wholesome. It sounds like such a good time. Next up, I have Winterkeep by Christian Kishore. This is the spin-off that came out earlier this year of the Graceling trilogy, or what was originally the trilogy, now it's a series. I loved Graceling when I was younger. It was one of my favorite books when I was 16, 17. It's set in this world where some people have abilities and then some people are just normal, and those who have abilities have different colored eyes. That's how they're distinguished, but also everyone's ability is so different and so unique to them. Each book of the original trilogy is a companion novel, so we follow a different character, and I believe in here we follow another different character. So I'm very interested to see who we're going to follow, but also see if our old characters are going to make an appearance, because I believe they do. Months ago I went into an op shop. I love going into op shops. I should explain, op shops are what we call here charity shops. So I love going into charity shops and looking at books, and I went in quite a few months ago and I found this series. The first book is The Rivers of London, and then I also picked up The Hanging Tree and Moon Over Soho. I honestly don't know much about these. I picked them up because first of all they were literally like $1 each, and it is a series I've had my eye on. Like, I've always just seen it in the bookstores. Particularly I don't really hear much about it on booktube, but I know it is urban fantasy and it's like magical, and I really love urban fantasy set in London. Like, it's one of my favorite things and something I really gravitate towards. So I'm excited to see what I think of these. I loved that I didn't have to pay a big price tag for them as well, so I honestly just picked them up because they were so cheap, and you know, it was for charity too. Next, I have some recent purchases. So I grabbed last month The Beast Warrior. Now this is the sequel to The Beast Player, which I read in September and I really enjoyed. It's a very anime and Studio Ghibli-esque story that's quite slow paced, and we follow this girl who is separated from her mum and her village quite early on, and then she finds herself sort of wandering the world and a lot of her life, and all along she sort of has this quite deep connection with animals. She's just so curious about them and she cares for them so much, and it does end up becoming about her and this animal companion that she makes and their bond. It's difficult to give too much of a story for the first book because it is such a slow paced story, but it really is just about like humans' relationships with animals and how they can be tested. It's also about the treatment of animals and how humans can use animals as weapons in order to fight wars and in order to protect themselves, and how animals in captivity, how they might be suffering, whilst in the wild we might not be able to have a bond, but at least they're healthy and they're free. So it sort of looks at all those. I really enjoyed the themes. This is a sequel. I know this takes place 10 years after the first book, so I'm very interested to see like what's going to happen, because book 1 definitely kind of finished like a standalone. It could have been a standalone, so I'm scared. I don't want anything to happen, but I feel like it's going to. Next up I have The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, which was at one point earlier this year my most anticipated release, and I still haven't gotten to it. I really loved what I've read from Tasha Suri so far. She writes fantasy romance, it's quite political heavy, and it is slow burn, and Empire of Sand is like the best slow burn ever. I know this one is sapphic, which made me really excited to pick it up, and that we have a maid and some sort of princess, and that's who the romance is between. I also picked up Kingdom of Souls. This book I grabbed at the very beginning of the year because it was on sale, so I grabbed it, and I know this has to do with necromancy, and I freaking love books to do with necromancy, and I need to do more, so that's literally why I picked up this book. And it's also, again, a YA fantasy. YA fantasy is always a good fun time. I can't wait to read this. I also grabbed some of the Witcher books. So this is book 1, Blood of Elves, and I also grabbed the last book, which is Lady of the Lake. I really enjoyed the TV show of The Witcher, and I'm so excited for season 2. I have not played the video game, but I really want to do that too. I love that concept of this guy like just traveling around hunting monsters. I think it's really cool. I also grabbed the last book in a series of unfortunate events. This is a series I started when I was a kid and I never finished it. I don't even know how many books I got into this, but I definitely didn't get to book I think this is book 13, yeah, book 13. And I haven't watched the Netflix show. I don't know if I will, to be honest. But this follows 3 kids who at the beginning of the series become orphans. And basically their life just keeps getting more and more tragic as more misfortune falls upon them. They also inherited a lot of wealth from their parents, so there's people trying to chase after them and get the money. I also grabbed 2 of the Stalking Jack the Ripper books. So Stalking Jack the Ripper and Capturing the Devil. This is a series set in Victorian England and we follow this girl called Audrey Rose. It is YA historical romance. I hesitate to call it fantasy, but I think it is sort of fantasy, but not heavy fantasy. I think it's quite light on the fantasy. And in book 1 we follow Audrey Rose, who investigates the Stalking Jack the Ripper cases, and in each book I believe there's a different focus on other cases. So I know like book 2 is like Dracula and all that. Let's get into all the Robin Hood books I brought this year. We have a stack. We have Fool's Errand, The Golden Fool, and Fool's Fate, which are the 3 books in the Tawny Man series, which is the 3rd trilogy of hers. I can't give you a synopsis of these, but basically we return to the setting that the first trilogy is set in. So there's a lot of the old characters from the original books that are in here, which was fun to see. For the most part, there was one character I really just did not think needed to come back because I hate her. I also picked up the first 2 books in the Rainwild series. So book 1 is Dragon Keeper and book 2 is Dragon Haven. Don't even know what I can say about these because there's really not much, but we are back in the Rainwild part of the world, which is a part we're introduced to in the Life Shaded series. But yeah, basically these books are fantasy. There's usually quite a few characters, but there's always central characters. They're quite political. Most of the conflict in the story has to do with like politics, whether that's like worldly politics or if it's interpersonal relationship politics, which it is a lot of that. These books are definitely not plot heavy. They're very character driven. So if you're someone who really needs plot, I wouldn't recommend them to you. But if you enjoy being in a fantasy world that has really interesting like magic, really fascinating characters, and characters that are just so well crafted, like Robin Hood is definitely a master at creating her characters and developing her characters, which is what honestly keeps me reading. I also picked up Chain of Iron, and I was so annoyed because I ordered this online and I didn't realize it was one of those annoying hardbacks where there's no dust jacket and the image of the book is just printed on the cover. I'm not a fan of this. This is Cassie Clare's latest book that came out at the end of last year, I think, and I have read it and I did enjoy it. This follows the children of the characters from the Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince, Clockwork Princess books, so it's always a fun time revisiting this sort of part of the world and these characters and seeing some of the other characters older and seeing like the new ones. It is urban fantasy. Do I need to say much about the Shadowhunters? I don't think so. I also grabbed A Court of Silver Flames, which is obviously Sarah J Maas's latest book in the Court of Thorns of Roses series, and we follow Nesta, who is the sister of the main character in the original trilogy. I was not a fan of this. I was disappointed. You can watch the vlog I did if you want to know more. I also picked up Gideon the Ninth, which I did read at the beginning of the year, and I started rereading it and then I just like never continued. I need to do that. This book is a really interesting fusion of sci-fi and fantasy. It's quite gothic. It's set in this house where Gideon has been raised and she's sort of trapped. Like she wants to leave. We're introduced to her wanting to leave, but she can't. And she's basically a bodyguard, and she's trained her life to be a bodyguard to the heir of the house. This book is really quite political. There's some sort of like game competition element to it. I loved the writing because it was very flowery, pretty writing, but then there was a lot of like swearing and foul language included, so it was just a very interesting mix. I also grabbed Realm of the Ash. This I grabbed at the very beginning of the year, right after I read Empire of Sand, which is book 1 in this duology. This is a companion duology, so in this book we follow the younger sister of the main character from book 1, and this is a fantasy romance. It's political, it's quite slow burn. I was slightly disappointed by this one in comparison to book 1. I think I just honestly preferred the characters a little bit more from book one, but overall I really enjoyed this like setup and this focus on women. I also grabbed the Dragon Republic, which I had read before but on audio, and I really wanted to own a physical copy, and I've already read this. And I also picked up The Burning God finally, which I am currently reading and loving and having my heart broken. These books are book 2 and book 3 in the Poppy Wars series, which is honestly one of my favorite fantasy series. I love it because I love Rin, the main character, who is just like this unhinged murderer who's like starts off just wanting to save herself. Really, she doesn't want to be married to a much older man and to have kids and to serve a household. She wants to serve herself. And once she enters a military academy and she trains, she gets caught up in war, and it's just so political, and there's like a lot of military warfare, and there's magic in this as well that's connected to the gods. I also grabbed Sorcerer to the Crown, which I started this book back in like March or February, and I never finished it. This is set in Regency London, and we are following a sorcerer who serves the royal family. Again, I just love like urban fantasy settings in like London and England, and this is also a fantasy romance. And another book I'm in the middle of, but I only just started, so it's not as bad as that one, but A Master of Jinn. This is the first book in this series, and it's set in Cairo in the 1920s. It's this world that is historical but also very fantastical. We have jinn, we have angels, we have ghosts, we have all these supernatural beings, and it also has a murder mystery which we are introduced to at the start. And we're following this lady called Fatma, who is an investigator and is tasked with investigating the series. We're almost there. The last bunch of books are books I have been very kindly gifted. I am very lucky. Some of these were late Christmas gifts and most of these were birthday gifts. First up, I have A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians. This book, I believe, is set during the revolution in London, and in this book it's all about like magicians, and I think they're discriminated against from my understanding. So again, I love my urban fantasy, and I think part of this is set in France and part of it is set in other parts of Britain. I shall find out. And this, as well as this one here, was very kindly gifted to me by Meg from Meg with Books, and this one is a time traveling book about witches, and I freaking love witches and time traveling, so I am so hyped for this. And it's also got a romance, so I think this is going to be a really fun time. Next, I have Son of the Storm, which Tammy very kindly gave to me. I don't know much about this, but I know when Tammy read it, she loved it. I believe we had like a ward of city and there's magic outside, and we have a boy we follow who's like curious about that and ends up discovering more. He probably gets magic. You know, YA fantasy loves to do that, which I love. I'm so excited for this one. I've heard really great things. The next two my friend Katie very kindly gave me, and that is first of all The Unbroken, which I am so hyped for because it has a desert setting, it has a sapphic romance, it has like military warfare. It just sounds really, really interesting. I believe we follow this girl who was stolen as a child, and then she was raised by the Empire to fight in the army. And she also gave me For the Wolf, which is a Little Red Riding Hood retelling that she really, really enjoyed. And I love my retelling, so I cannot wait to get to this one. Next, I have a gift from Erin from Booked and Busy, and that is Ashes of the Sun. What makes me most excited about this book is we follow like a pair of siblings, like the two main characters are siblings, and I honestly do not think there are enough books out there where we follow siblings. Like, it's my favorite thing. Siblings in a fantasy world fighting together. It's the best. But I believe in this one there's a bit of a twist where the boy thinks his sister was lost a long time ago, and then he ends up being reunited with her, but things are very, very different with her, and I think they're on like opposing sides, so it's like conflict with siblings, which I hope they like get back together. It just sounds like it's going to be a really like political fantasy with interesting magic and setup, but also with these like two siblings at the center. That's just gonna like pull at your heartstrings, which I'm very excited about. And I was very kindly gifted this book, Future Home of the Living God, by my friend Olivia, and I believe this is a very like feminist novel. I can't remember the exact setup of this book, but what really intrigued me was it was a lot to do about women's rights and women's rights with their bodies, especially when they're pregnant. And I think that's just such a relevant topic. I mean, it's always such a relevant topic, but I think especially now when abortion rights and such are being abolished, and there are so many people in political power who are against them, and this just looks at that and examines it. But I think it also becomes a story about motherhood, because this girl at the same time, while she's pregnant, is trying to chase down her mother because she was raised by a foster family. So I'm very interested in this. I think it's going to be quite a like heartbreaking read, so I'm definitely going to be mindful of when I pick it up, but I'm really looking forward to it, and I've heard good things. The last book I have was a gift from my friend Rue, and she kindly gave me Vagabonds. This I'm hyped about because Tammy read it and loved it, and we do have quite similar tastes. This is a sci-fi novel, and it's set in the future after the humans have had war with the Martians, and the Martians are now like independent, and I believe we follow a bunch of characters who are Martians as kids, and then they end up moving to Earth, and then they're trying to relocate back to Mars or whatever, and it's quite difficult and different for them. I think this is a book that deals with like a lot of culture, a lot of identity, and a lot to do with like society and how different societies are run and the conflicts. I just am so fascinated by that and the themes those sort of stories entail, and I think it's just going to be a very interesting look at all that, and I'm excited. I'm really excited. And so that is it for basically all the books I brought in this past almost year. Please let me know what books I need to read ASAP of the ones I have not read that were in this video, and let me know your thoughts on any of these. I'd really love to hear them. And thank you so much for watching. I really hope you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.